My name is Lena Delacroix, and until 6 months ago, I believed home was where the heart was, until I found myself barred from every room inside the very house I thought was mine. The night my father pointed at the faded green garage door and told me to sleep there, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the chill of concrete against my cheek or the racket of rusted springs. It was the realization that the man who'd once tucked me in with a story of shooting stars had decided I no longer deserved a place under his roof. I remember that evening as though it were painted in dark oils, heavy shadows, each word he spoke echoing against the walls. He didn't shout, he didn't rage. He simply looked at me, eyes coated with disappointment thicker than any Sunday sermon, and said, "You can sleep in the garage. You'll find some blankets under the workbench." He closed the door, sealing the sound of my heartbeat against the lock. I paced the length of that narrow space, lined with dusty tools and the lingering scent of motor oil, grappling with the life I'd always believed my father and I shared. It felt surreal. The framed family photographs leaned against the wall, their glass smudged, like ghosts urging me to remember who I was before everything changed. My fingers traced the edges of his old toolboxes, the same ones he showed me how to open when I was too small to reach the handles. That night they were new rooms in a prison, each drawer a cell I didn't know how to escape. I didn't stay long. The next morning, while dawn was still a faint glow behind the maple tree, I packed my few belongings. My laptop, a suitcase of clothes, and the stack of college acceptance letters I believed would impress him more than any toolbox. I climbed through the window and stood on the porch, trying to catch his eye through the living room window. He never appeared. So I left. I moved into a cramped studio apartment in the heart of the city, where the only family I had were the unpaid rent notices taped to my door, and the barista at the corner cafe who knew my order by heart. I worked 3 jobs: tutoring, waiting tables, and freelancing as a graphic designer, just enough to pay rent and buy groceries. I crafted logos until my eyes blurred, served coffee until my shoulders ached, and graded papers until the midnight oil burned both in my mind and in the single bulb hanging overhead. But every night, when I closed my eyes, I saw that garage door, locked, immovable. And I realized that sleeping in the garage wasn't the worst thing he'd done. It was the promise that he owned the roof over my head. That the place I grew up in, those walls I loved, belonged to him, not me. And so I began to plan. I studied real estate listings and scraped through public records at the county clerk's office, learning how mortgages and deeds worked. I devoured financial blogs late at night, under the dim light of my desk lamp, building a mental blueprint of how money could buy power. The irony wasn't lost on me, that I, the daughter he cast out, would return not on his terms, but mine. One crisp Saturday morning, I found it, a listing for my childhood home. The same address where my father had told me I could sleep in the garage. It was for sale, marked foreclosure in bold letters. His mortgage defaulted months ago, yet he'd never told me. He'd been so sure I'd never be able to stand on my own 2 feet, he didn't notice the bank's letters piling up like the warnings in the garage. The price was astonishingly low, a fraction of what the neighborhood had seen only a year earlier. My pulse raced as I filled out the online inquiry form, calculating down to the penny what I'd need for a down payment. My fingers trembled. This was the moment I'd built myself toward in 1,000 coffee cups and late-night study sessions. A day later, I sat across from the bank loan officer in a spotless office smelling of fresh paint and polished wood. I slid the documents across the table, proof of my income, my savings, and my credit score. She raised an eyebrow at the name Lena Delacroix, same as the owner on the foreclosure notice, but said nothing. When the papers were signed, the keys to my childhood home would be mine. I left the bank with a file folder thicker than any I'd carried in school. The sun glinted off the skyscrapers as I stepped outside, a reminder that I was small but not insignificant. I cradled that folder like a newborn, because inside was a promise that no one could lock me out again. That evening, I walked up to the front door of the house I had built myself a way back into. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn. My heart pounded in my throat as my fingertips brushed the cold brass doorknob. I had a plan: to change the locks, to hand my father his keys and keep him outside where he belonged. I turned the key and stepped inside. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The door groaned open like it was waking from a long sleep. The smell of the house hit me first. Stale coffee, mildew from the leaky faucet in the kitchen, the sharp tang of old motor oil that somehow clung to the carpet. My shoes crossed the threshold, and for the first time in months, I wasn't a guest or a prisoner. I was the owner. My name was on the deed. My signature sealed every page. The ink hadn't even dried when I'd driven from the bank to the locksmith's office. The man there had raised an eyebrow when I gave him the address, but I paid in cash, and he didn't ask questions. 20 minutes later, a thick envelope with 4 identical brass keys sat in my glove box. The house felt frozen in time. The living room couch still bore the sag from my father's favorite spot. His slippers, torn at the heel, sat beneath the coffee table like obedient dogs. On the mantel, the photos hadn't moved. Me at 5, me at graduation, and one of him and my mother, years before she left without taking a single thing. But I wasn't here to reminisce. I locked the door behind me, then I changed the locks. It took me 3 hours and 2 YouTube tutorials to remove the old deadbolts and screw in the new ones. The sound of the drill echoed through the halls like a war cry. With every turn of the screwdriver, I erased the chapter where I'd been cast out and began a new one, on my terms. By the time I finished, my hands were blistered and my clothes soaked with sweat. I stood in the center of the living room, panting, the new keys in my palm. I dropped the old keys in the trash. I slept that night in my old bedroom. The mattress was hard, the sheets stale, but I slept like the dead. No more creaking garage doors. No more wind sneaking in through cracks. Just silence and a door that locked from the inside. When morning light slanted through the blinds, I woke with a start, not because of a noise, but because of what I had to do next. My father didn't know the house had changed hands. He still believed the bank would give him time, that the mortgage letters were warnings, not eviction notices, that he could outlast the bureaucracy. But the truth was I owned the house, and the truth was I didn't want to live with him anymore. I stood by the window and watched the street. A red pickup truck rounded the corner slowly, then pulled up along the curb. It was the same one he'd driven for years. He climbed out, slow as ever, rubbing his shoulder the way he always did when it rained. He walked to the door and twisted the knob. It didn't turn. He frowned, knocked, then knocked harder. "Lena?" I didn't answer. I stood just out of sight, heart pounding. My palms were slick with sweat, my throat dry. He knocked again, more forceful this time. "Lena, open the door, what's going on?" I stepped forward and opened the blinds just enough to make eye contact. His face changed instantly. Surprise, confusion, and something deeper, something close to fear. I opened the door a crack. "Lena," he said, voice rough, "what is this? Did you lock me out?" "I didn't lock you out," I said. "I own the house now. You don't live here anymore." His brow furrowed, mouth falling open. "What the hell are you talking about?" I handed him a manila envelope, copies of the deed, the foreclosure notice, the bank's approval. He snatched it, flipped through the pages and went pale. "This is a mistake. They weren't supposed to." "They did," I said. "You missed too many payments. The bank put the house up for sale, I bought it." He looked up at me like he didn't recognize me. "You bought it?" "With my own money." "You can't do this. I raised you." "You told me to sleep in the garage," I said flatly. "Now you sleep somewhere else." I closed the door in his face. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of emotion. He stayed in his truck the first night. I saw him through the curtains, parked at the curb with the seat leaned back, arms crossed, stubborn as a mule. On the second night, he tried calling. I didn't answer. On the third, I found a note slid under the door. "Stupestus, you made your point. Let me back in. We'll talk." But I wasn't interested in talking. I was interested in rebuilding. I emptied out the garage and turned it into a studio space. Every time I pushed out a rusted shelf or swept a corner thick with cobwebs, I remembered that first night, sleeping on the cold concrete, crying into a rolled-up jacket. Now the garage had a window, curtains, a small couch I'd bought off Facebook Marketplace. It smelled like lavender and cedar instead of grease and regret. It was mine. I painted the kitchen next, bright white, with pale blue accents. I replaced the old blinds with new ones, replaced the faucet, even scrubbed the tiles clean until they gleamed. I played music while I worked, soft jazz, lo-fi, sometimes old rock from my father's collection. I didn't do it to remember him. I did it to reclaim the house, note by note. One morning, I opened the front door to see a suitcase on the porch. He wasn't there. Just the suitcase. And a note. I'm going to stay with Alan for a while. You win. Enjoy your house. No apology, no acknowledgement, just surrender. And for the first time, I didn't care. But peace didn't last long. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a lawyer. He was representing my father, who was challenging the sale, claiming he hadn't been notified, that the foreclosure was unlawful, that I'd acted in bad faith. My throat closed. I felt like I was 17 again, cornered, powerless, unseen. But I wasn't a girl anymore. I had receipts, contracts, bank approvals, paper trails. I hired my own lawyer. Her name was Iris Lambert, and she wore confidence like armor. The first time we met, she read through the case file in silence, then closed the folder and said, "He has no chance, but we'll bury him in paperwork if he wants to try." The court date was set. I cleaned the house top to bottom the night before, scrubbed the sinks, fluffed the pillows, mopped the floor. It felt like preparing a stage for a performance. The courtroom was cold and sterile, but I felt warmer with Iris beside me. My father sat across the aisle, his suit ill-fitting, his hair slicked back like he was still trying to impress the world. He didn't look at me. The judge reviewed the documents, asked questions, nodded along. The foreclosure had followed protocol. The bank had the right. I had made a legal offer and paid in full. The case was dismissed. My father stood, mouth open, ready to protest, but the judge raised a hand. "Mr. Delacroix, your daughter is the legal owner. You have no standing." The gavel dropped. I walked out of that courtroom feeling 20 pounds lighter. The air outside was crisp, the kind that smells like leaves and the start of something new. When I got home, I stood on the porch for a long moment. Then I stepped inside and locked the door behind me, this time not out of fear, but out of finality. Still, something didn't sit right, a gut feeling, a sliver of unease. And it wasn't long before I found out why. The very next day, I noticed things were off. A drawer open that I hadn't touched, a window slightly cracked, my laptop's power cord unplugged when I was sure I'd left it charging. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that stress was playing tricks on me. Until I heard footsteps in the hallway at 2 a.m. When I checked, no one was there. But the back door was unlocked. And muddy footprints led from the kitchen to the stairwell. End of part 2. Ready for part 3? The muddy footprints glistened faintly under the hallway light, each one a stark imprint of trespass. I stared at them for a long time, heart pounding against my ribcage like it wanted out. They weren't mine. I hadn't worn boots in weeks, let alone walked through mud. And I hadn't let anyone in. I tiptoed backward, not daring to disturb the pattern. The tracks led from the kitchen, through the hallway, and stopped just at the base of the stairs. From there, nothing, like the person vanished into thin air. I crept through the house, turning on every light, checking every room. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows. Just those muddy prints and an eerie silence. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I installed cameras. Front porch, back door, the garage. I bought motion sensor lights and a doorbell cam. Every entrance was now under surveillance. I even placed a small alarm on my bedroom door, the kind that shrieked like a banshee when tripped. For days, nothing happened. No new footprints. No signs of tampering. My phone notifications remained blissfully quiet. I started to think maybe it had been my imagination after all, some mixture of exhaustion and paranoia. Then, a week later, the motion camera caught him. My father. At 3:41 a.m., the front porch camera lit up, capturing his figure moving stealthily toward the door. He wore a hoodie pulled low and carried something bulky in his arms. He didn't try the knob. Didn't knock. He just crouched low and left a package on the mat, then disappeared into the darkness. I retrieved it in the morning, an old wooden box cracked at the corners and locked with a rusted latch. No note, no key, just the box. I hesitated before opening it. Part of me wanted to smash it, burn it, rid myself of whatever he thought he could dump at my feet. But I took it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and forced the latch open with a screwdriver. Inside were pictures, dozens of them, of me, as a child, as a teen. School plays, soccer games, family dinners I barely remembered. Tucked into one corner was a small velvet pouch. Inside was my mother's locket, the one she'd worn every day until she left. I hadn't seen it since. I didn't know what game he was playing. Guilt? Manipulation? A twisted olive branch? I locked the box in a cabinet and changed the alarm code. Again. But the damage had already taken root. My peace, hard-won and desperately guarded, was shattered. A few nights later, the doorbell rang at 2 a.m. I bolted upright, heart in my throat. I checked the camera. Him. Again. This time, he was crying. "Lena, please," he whispered, voice ragged through the speaker. "I'm sick. I need a place to stay. Just a few days, please." I didn't answer. He stayed there, sitting on the steps until the sun began to rise. Then he walked away. The next day, a woman called me from a private number. Her voice was firm, professional. "Ms. Delacroix, I'm calling on behalf of County Social Services. Your father, Mr. Thomas Delacroix, listed you as his emergency contact. He's been diagnosed with late-stage pulmonary fibrosis. He has no insurance, no fixed residence." My mouth went dry. "What are you saying?" "We're asking if you're willing to take custody. Otherwise, he'll be placed in a public facility." I hung up. I spent the next 24 hours pacing, arguing with myself. He'd cast me out. He'd tried to sue me. He'd stalked me, broken into my home, and now he wanted care? But I remembered something I swore I wouldn't. When I was 6 and had the flu, he stayed by my bed all night with a cool rag on my forehead. When I broke my wrist in high school, he took a week off work just to drive me to therapy. He hadn't always been a monster. He'd just become one over time. I didn't want to forgive him. But I didn't want his death on my conscience either. So I made a plan. I converted the garage, again. Installed a hospital bed, a space heater, and an air purifier. I stocked it with supplies. Meds, a mini fridge, a portable commode. It looked more like a sterile cell than a room, but it was clean and safe. I called social services back. "He can stay, but only under these conditions. No access to the house, no legal claims, and I keep the deed. You put that in writing or there's no deal." They agreed. 2 days later, an ambulance rolled up. I watched from the porch as paramedics wheeled my father out on a stretcher. He looked smaller than I remembered. Shrunken, pale, a ghost of the man who once kicked me out. He didn't speak, didn't even look at me. They set him up inside the garage, checked his vitals, handed me a clipboard. As soon as they left, I closed the garage door and stood outside, staring at the same entrance I'd once slept behind. Now it was his turn. The days that followed were awkward. I brought him meals but didn't stay. I filled his prescriptions but didn't talk. He had a TV, books, his oxygen machine. I monitored his vitals through an app connected to the medical devices. But one night, I lingered. He looked up from his bed, his face worn. "You're angry," he rasped. "No kidding. I deserved it. What I did, I thought I was teaching you toughness, teaching you to survive." "You were teaching me that I didn't matter," I said. His eyes welled. "I lost the house, Lena. I lost your mother. I was losing everything. I thought pushing you away would make it easier if you left too." I didn't answer. I just left. But I kept thinking about those words. Each one a key in a lock I didn't want to open. Weeks passed. He grew weaker. Some nights I found him coughing into a rag until it stained red. Other nights he didn't even stir. One morning I brought his breakfast and found him sitting up, holding the velvet pouch. "She told me to give this to you when you turn 21, he said. But I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd get a second chance. I took it. My hands trembled. "I don't expect forgiveness," he whispered. I just wanted to see you again before I go." I looked down at the locket. Inside was a picture of my mother and me. He died 3 weeks later. No funeral, no ceremony, just a cremation and a cardboard box from the county. I scattered the ashes beneath the old maple tree in the backyard. I thought I'd feel closure, relief, something. But instead, I just felt quiet. Like the house was finally still. I renovated every room after that, tore out the carpets, painted the walls a warm cream. I filled the house with plants and light and music. I adopted a dog, Rue, a shaggy mutt with too much energy and not enough manners. I started my own design firm, Lena D Creative, built a portfolio, hired interns. My studio became the garage, now filled with light and inspiration instead of sorrow. The house became a home again, and I locked the door every night, not out of fear but out of peace. End of part 3. Let me know when to continue with part 4. It had been 5 months since my father's ashes sank into the soil beneath the backyard maple tree. 5 months of silence. Of no sudden knocks, no heavy footsteps down the hall at midnight, no wheezing coughs echoing from the garage. Peace had become a constant companion, but not an easy one. It hovered, tentative, like it was waiting for something to go wrong again. In those 5 months, the house transformed. The walls that once soaked in arguments and cold silences were now lined with abstract art prints and framed design mock-ups from my growing firm. Each room bore my fingerprint. The kitchen, bright and airy, now held a long oak table that seated friends who visited on Sundays. The living room had become a soft sprawl of floor cushions, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and the occasional clutter of Rue's torn toys. My childhood bedroom was now my sanctuary, painted sage green, lit with golden sconces, and scented with rosemary and orange peel. And the garage, once a place of exile, now pulsed with creativity. It was my design studio, 6 desks, corkboards of color swatches and sketches, rolling carts with art supplies, a mini fridge humming in the corner. The same space that had once held the echo of my father's lessons was now alive with the laughter of my small team. Zoe, my intern from design school, Jordan, a free-spirited illustrator who refused to use rulers, and Anton, the most detail-obsessed typeface nerd I'd ever met. We were small, but mighty. The business had grown fast. I wasn't prepared for how fast. After a local startup hired us for a complete rebrand, word got around. Referrals poured in. Suddenly, I wasn't just designing logos. I was building campaigns, pitching ad strategies, managing full-scale visual identities. I didn't just own a house anymore. I owned something bigger, a vision, a name. But with growth came growing pains. One afternoon in early spring, I sat at my kitchen island, a mug of tea untouched beside me, staring at the email from my accountant. Kurt Chopin, subject urgent, potential audit plus business expansion advice. Apparently we were making too much money too fast. I read the email again and again, then called Iris, my lawyer, who had become something of a mentor over the last year. "Is this real?" I asked. "Entirely. The government loves young success stories until they smell a mistake in your books. You need a financial advisor yesterday. And a plan." "I didn't even think I'd make it past 6 months." Iris chuckled. "That's your problem, Lena. You plan like you're always fighting to survive. Start planning like you've already won." Her words clung to me. That night I sat in the garage, my studio, alone. The team had gone home. The room was quiet, save for the distant bark of Rue chasing squirrels in his sleep. I looked around at the walls, the skylight, the plants by the window, the sketches taped in chaotic clusters. I remembered when this room smelled like damp concrete and disappointment. Now it smelled like markers, candle wax, and ambition. I opened my laptop and began researching commercial real estate. If we were going to survive expansion, we needed more space, a real office, a conference room, somewhere clients could visit without tiptoeing around dog toys or stepping over charging cables. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it led me, oddly enough, back to the past. One listing caught my eye, an old commercial building on the edge of town. Vacant, brick front, massive windows. 2 stories. It had once been a furniture store, then a dental office, then a co-op. Now it sat empty. It was also, incredibly, listed under a name I recognized. Alan Merrick. My father's old friend. The same Alan my father had supposedly gone to stay with when he first left the house. I remembered him vaguely. A big laugh, thick mustache, always wore fishing vests and cologne that smelled like crushed pine needles. He used to bring over barbecue every 4th of July and sing off-key to Springsteen. Iris pulled his information in under 10 minutes. He was still local, still owned the property, and according to public records, deeply in debt. So I called him. Lena Delacroix? His voice was gruff, older. Well, I'll be damned. Haven't heard that name since your dad passed. I'm looking to buy a property, Mr. Merrick, and your name came up. He laughed. Figured someone would come sniffing once they saw the tax liens. I'm not sniffing. I'm offering. We met the next day. He looked older, but the cologne hadn't changed. We walked the building. High ceilings, creaky floors, a cracked skylight that flooded the place with golden light. It was perfect. He leaned against the banister. You always were the smart one. Didn't think you'd grow up to be a shark, though. I'm not a shark. He grinned. You just happen to know when to bite. I made an offer. He accepted it within the hour, below market price. I owe your father that much, he said. I didn't reply. I just signed the contract. That weekend, we moved. The team helped paint. Zoe picked out chairs. Anton obsessed over the perfect conference table height. Jordan insisted on a mural wall. Rue marked his territory on every box before falling asleep in the supply closet. We became a real company. Lena D. Creative moved into the city. And the house, my house, finally became just a home again. It felt like breathing. Then the letter came. A thin envelope, no return address. Typed. Asterisk to Ms. Lena Delacroix. Your father owed a debt, one you inherited. You may have thought the past was buried with him. But some doors don't stay locked forever. Asterisk. It wasn't signed. It wasn't threatening, legally, but it sent a chill down my spine. I reread it 3 times, scanned for fingerprints, checked the postmark, local, hand-delivered, likely. I brought it to Iris. She read it in silence, then folded it neatly. Could be a prank, could be real. You sure he didn't have any old debts? Loan sharks? Gambling? Not that I know of. We'll find out. In the days that followed, I began digging. I requested his financial history, pored over old bills, checked court records. And there, buried under a mountain of outdated utilities, was a name I'd never seen before. Clara Wynn. A single payment, $30,000, made out from my father's old account 15 years ago. Memo, agreement settlement. That was it. No further record, no contact info, no case file. I called Iris, she looked into it. Clara Wynn had once worked for my father. Briefly. A live-in nurse, after a back injury he'd sustained on the job. Fired after 3 months. No lawsuit, no complaint. But the payment suggested something had happened. Something worth $30,000 in hush money. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the note, the way it had been worded. Some doors don't stay locked forever. At 2:13 a.m., I heard a noise outside. Rue growled. I got up, walked to the window. There, standing just beyond the hedge, was a figure in a hood, not moving, just watching. I flicked on the porch light. They didn't flinch. I reached for my phone, heart racing. The figure turned and walked away. But in the spot where they'd been standing, the next morning, I found a second letter, weighted down by a single key. The note said, Asterisk, you live in his house. You built on his secrets. Do you know who you are, Lena? Because I do. Asterisk, yo? And the key wasn't for any lock in my house. I held the key in my palm like it was some cursed artifact out of a movie. It was old, thin, slightly rusted. with a strange curve at the top and notched teeth that didn't match any of the locks in my house or my studio. I tried it on every door and drawer I could think of. Nothing. Iris ordered a full background check on Clara Wynne, but what came back was minimal. Too minimal. No address, no listed employment since 2008, and an outdated photo from what looked like a driver's license taken over a decade ago. No criminal record, no property ownership, just a ghost in the system. But she was real, that much I knew. And someone, possibly her, was watching me, or had hired someone else to. I decided to revisit the last place that still felt haunted, the attic. I hadn't stepped foot there since reclaiming the house, not because I was afraid of boxes or cobwebs, but because it had always been my father's sanctuary, a place he'd disappeared into after fights, where the floorboards creaked at odd hours, where locked trunks were stacked like a mausoleum. I climbed the narrow stairs just before sunset. The dust hit my lungs like powdered history. The attic was larger than I remembered, stretched into shadows I hadn't explored since I was a child. And there, along the far wall, stood an old wardrobe, the kind you read about in fantasy books. Carved wood, brass handles, a little padlock hanging off the latch. The key fit. The lock clicked. I opened the doors. Inside, hanging on the back wall, was a coat I hadn't seen in years, my father's work jacket from the refinery. But the pockets weren't empty. I pulled out a small leather-bound book, a journal. Its pages were filled with his handwriting, rambling at first, then sharp, then frantic. Descriptions of dreams. Names I didn't recognize. One page was just the same sentence written over and over. Make H, asterisk, I didn't know she was pregnant. Below that, in a different ink, Pines for asterisk. She said she'd come back for her daughter. Asterisk. My hands shook as I flipped through. Dozens of entries referencing Clara. How she'd threatened to take everything. How she knew things from before my mother left. How she'd promised to return and expose him if he didn't pay her off. I read the last entry 3 times. Times asterisk. If she ever gives that key to Lena, it means she's ready to tell her the truth. But I won't let that happen. I won't let her twist my daughter against me. Asterisk. I sat down on the attic floor. Was it a lie? A paranoid delusion from a dying man? Or had there been a secret all along? One my mother might have known, one Clara definitely did? I took the journals straight to Iris. She skimmed through it, brow furrowed. This isn't admissible in any court, but it's definitely something. Take her daughter. Lena, did you ever wonder why your mom really left? I swallowed. I used to think it was my fault, then I blamed him, but I never had answers. She just vanished. Time to find her. It wasn't easy. My mother, Eloise Delacroix, hadn't been in contact with anyone since I was 12. No letters, no calls, no postcards. Just gone. My father had claimed she'd run off with some guy, but he'd never given a name, never filed for divorce, never remarried. Iris hired a private investigator. Meanwhile, I returned to my work. But I couldn't focus. Every sketch I made felt shallow. Every pitch I gave lacked conviction. My team noticed. You okay? Zoe asked one morning. I smiled tightly. Growing pains. She gave me a look that said she didn't buy it, but let it go. 2 weeks later, the PI sent an email. Subject: Eloise Delacroix, status update. Asterisk Lena. We found her. She's alive. Living under the name Eloise Beckman in Cornwall, UK. No family listed. Retired. Keeps to herself. Here's her address. Asterisk Megaus. I booked a flight that same night. The town was small, coastal, filled with slate roofs and salty air. I checked into a bed and breakfast, heart rattling in my chest like it had never settled since the key arrived. Her cottage was perched on a cliff road, surrounded by wildflowers and a crooked fence. I walked the stone path, each step heavier than the last. I knocked. A woman opened the door. Gray hair, cropped short, eyes like mine. A moment of silence passed between us. Then she whispered, Lena? I nodded. She opened the door wider. Come in. Her house smelled like chamomile and lemon polish. Clean, lived in. There were books stacked everywhere, soft rugs, a kettle on the stove. She poured tea. We sat. "I wondered if you'd ever find me," she said. "Why did you leave?" Her eyes misted. "Because your father made me choose, and I chose survival." I told her about the journal, about Clara, about the note. She exhaled slowly. "Clara was my cousin. She came to help me after I left, and she warned me what your father might do. But I didn't believe he'd keep you from me. Until he did." "So, what was the secret?" She looked down at her hands. "Lena, you were adopted." My ears rang. "No," I said. "No, that can't. I carried you home from the hospital. I raised you. I loved you. But you weren't biologically mine or his. You were left at a fire station in Maryland. We'd been trying for years. Your father pulled strings, used money he shouldn't have. You were ours, but not in the legal way." I couldn't breathe. She reached across the table. "I left because he threatened to take you and disappear if I ever told the truth, and I knew he meant it." I stood up. "I need to go." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "If you come back, I'll tell you everything. But only if you want to know." Back at the bed and breakfast, I stared at the ceiling for hours. I thought I knew who I was. Thought I'd won some battle by buying the house, building my business, burying my father's ghost. But now, the foundation beneath all of that was cracked. Zoe called. "Hey, I know you're on leave, but we have an emergency. Someone tried to break into the studio, nothing was taken, but they left something." My voice cracked. "What?" "A photograph. Of you, as a baby. On the back it said, 'Truth isn't what you inherit, it's what you uncover.'" My blood turned to ice. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. End of part 5. Let me know when to begin part 6. The photo lay on my studio desk, slightly curled at the edges. I stared at it for a long time, trying to absorb what I was seeing. A baby in a hospital bassinet, swaddled in blue. There was no name tag visible. No nurse or mother in the frame. Just a timestamp in the bottom corner. September 15th, 1996. A date I had never questioned. A birth I had never doubted. Truth isn't what you inherit, it's what you uncover. The words clawed at the inside of my skull. I locked the studio and took the photo home, slipping it between 2 pages of my father's journal. I read over the journal again, cross-referencing his cryptic notes with the hospital birth records I could access. Most of them were redacted, but I had names now. Clara Wynne, Eloise Beckman, the fire station, the hospital. Iris called the next morning. "Lena, I found something. It's about the fire station." I sat up straighter. "Go on." There was an incident in 1996. A newborn was dropped off anonymously. It made a blip in the local paper. No photos, of course, but a report was filed. I can get a copy. 2 days later, the file arrived. "Female infant," it read. "No identifying documents. Approximate age, 3 days old. Healthy. No visible injuries. Discovered at 2:46 a.m. by firefighter Marvin Dre." I traced that name, Dre, and found him listed in a retirement home outside Annapolis. He was 76 now. Still lucid, according to the facility nurse. I made the drive myself. He sat in a sunlit room, sipping ginger tea, watching a game show with the volume too low to hear. When I explained why I was there, his eyebrows knit together with cautious curiosity. "I remember that night," he said, after a long pause. "She was bundled up in a red blanket, not a hospital one, homemade. Whoever left her meant well. She was warm, fed, there was a note." My chest tightened. "A note?" He nodded. "Just one sentence. Please keep her safe. Her name is Lena." My world tilted. I asked him if he still had it. He smiled sadly. "I turned everything over to Child Services. Never saw her again." But he remembered the handwriting, sharp, hurried, and that the note had no signature. Back home, I pulled out every box from the attic that I hadn't touched. My father had kept everything. Receipts from grocery trips in 1998. Warranties for appliances we no longer owned. And there, hidden beneath an old tax folder, I found another photo. This time, it wasn't of me. It was a woman holding a baby. Her face was half-turned, blurry, but she had the same sloped nose as mine, the same high cheekbones. "Clara?" My real mother? I didn't know. I scanned the photo and sent it to Iris. She had connections with facial recognition software used by investigative journalists. We agreed not to act until we knew more. Meanwhile, things at the studio were shifting. We lost a major client, the first in our history. An anonymous online review accused us of stealing designs. My inbox filled with messages from trolls and concerned clients. Zoe was panicked. We didn't do anything wrong. I knew that. But someone was making it look like we had. It was sabotage. And my gut told me Clara was behind it. I returned to Cornwall. My mother greeted me at the door with a look that said she'd been expecting me. I need everything, I said. Now. All of it. She nodded and led me to a cedar chest at the foot of her bed. Inside were letters, journals, old photographs, and a newspaper clipping. I picked it up. Asterisk, mystery newborn rescued from fire station steps. September 1996. Asterisk. I was there, my mother said. Clara had been working as a nurse's aide. She called me one night, crying. Said a patient had begged her to take the child and run. That he was involved in something. Illegal adoption networks, under-the-table cash deals. She was afraid. I flew in from Wales and met her at a diner off I-70. She handed me the baby. You. Why didn't she keep me? She said someone was watching, someone dangerous, that if she kept you, they'd come for her. And my father? She shook her head. He didn't know until months later. When he found out, he did everything he could to make it look legal. But the paper trail was fake. It always was. I sat down hard. So who am I really? She handed me a small envelope. Inside was the note, the original handwritten version. Times asterisk. Please keep her safe. Her name is Lena, asterisk. And there, beneath it, a name. Times asterisk, M.H. Asterisk. Not Clara, not Eloise. Someone else entirely. The next day, Iris called. Facial recognition hit a match. The woman in the photo is, get this, Marissa Halden. She was a neonatal nurse at the hospital in Maryland. Quit her job 3 days after the fire station drop. Disappeared. No forwarding address. M.H. Marissa Halden. My birth mother. I wanted to scream, to cry, to hide. But I did none of that. Instead, I started preparing, because if Clara had gone this far, sabotaging my business, sending threats, planting photos, she wouldn't stop. And I still didn't know what she wanted. I began sleeping at the studio, not telling Zoe or the others. I kept Rue with me, installed a second set of cameras, bought a burner phone. 3 nights in, the back window shattered. I hit the silent alarm and grabbed the pepper spray. When I burst into the hallway, a shadow ducked behind the copy machine. Stop, I shouted. I've called the police. Silence. Then a woman's voice, tired, angry. I didn't come here to hurt you. She stepped out slowly, thin, weathered, short gray hair pulled into a knot. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes. Clara? She nodded. You've been stalking me. I've been trying to protect you. From what? She raised her hands. From who your father was. From who you were born to. You think you know the story, you don't. Then tell me. But the sound of sirens cut her off. She bolted for the emergency exit, gone before the cops arrived. I filed a report, gave them the photo, the journal, the threat notes. But I knew Clara wouldn't stop. I flew back to Eloise the next morning. She came to the studio, I said she's trying to protect me. Eloise didn't look surprised. She always thought your birth parents were involved in something criminal, that she was saving you, but she never told me what. What if I find her again? Then you get her to talk, really talk, because I think she's the only one who knows the whole truth. When I returned home, another letter waited for me, no envelope. Just taped to my front door. Asterisk. You want answers? Come alone. Tuesday, midnight. The greenhouse off, Route 14. Asterisk. No signature. No promise of safety. Just a meeting. And possibly the truth I'd spent my entire life searching for. The greenhouse off Route 14 was the kind of place the world forgot. Tucked behind a row of rotting sheds and a rusted-out trailer, it leaned under the weight of its own glass frame, half collapsed and veined with ivy. The moon hung low, throwing fractured light through broken panels, casting shadows like ghosts across the concrete. I parked far down the road and approached on foot. No one knew I was here. Not Iris, not Zoe, not even Eloise. Rue stayed at the house, whining as I closed the door behind me. My pepper spray was in my jacket. So was the burner phone, set to record. I stepped inside. The air was thick with damp soil and forgotten fertilizer. Somewhere, a single light buzzed. A battery lantern perched on an overturned crate. And there, sitting beside it, was Clara. She looked older than I remembered, not just in years but in weight. Like secrets had collapsed her spine. She didn't stand as I approached, just gestured to the crate across from her. I sat. "You came," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "Of course I did. You've been pulling strings for months, hiding, stalking, threatening. I didn't want to hurt you, I swear. I wanted to wait until you were strong enough to know the truth. I'm not a child." "No. But you were born into a mess I helped create, and it nearly killed us all." She reached into a worn satchel and pulled out a folder, thick, manila, water-stained. "Everything is in here, your adoption, the records, the hospital cover-up, your mother's real name, and what your father did to keep it buried." She handed it to me, and for a second, I couldn't move. My fingers hovered over it like they might burn. "You have one question," she said. "Ask it." I looked her in the eye. Was I stolen? She didn't blink. Yes. Silence fell like a guillotine. She began to explain. Marissa Holden, my birth mother, had been a whistleblower. A neonatal nurse who discovered that infants were being rerouted from the legal adoption system into a black market ring run by a few high-ranking hospital administrators, people who profited by placing babies off-record for large, under-the-table payments. "She tried to go public," Clara said, "and she paid for it. They discredited her, threatened her. When she gave birth to you, she didn't register you. She went into hiding. But someone found her, forced her to flee. That's when she called me." "You helped her?" "I helped you," Clara said. "I took you, dropped you off at the fire station, then I disappeared. But your father, he tracked me down, threatened me, paid me off to keep silent." "And my mother?" "No one knows where she is. I've tried to find her for years. But she vanished. Maybe she's dead, maybe she's hiding from the same people." I opened the folder. Inside were documents. Some original, some copies, handwritten notes, birth logs, falsified ID tags, receipts. At the bottom was a photo of Marissa, clear this time. She looked like me. Eyes full of fight. "I don't know who your father really was," Clara said, "but he was deeper in this than he let on. And he wasn't the only one. There are names in that folder that go beyond him. Judges, lawyers, people who buried the evidence so deep it never surfaced. Why come forward now?" "Because I'm dying." I stared. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I have months, maybe less, and I can't take this with me." Tears welled in her eyes, but didn't fall. "I thought I was doing the right thing. But then I watched what it did to you, the house, your father, the garage. All of it." I stood. "You should have told me." "I know." I walked out. The next morning, I gave the folder to Iris. She spent a week dissecting it, cross-checking names, validating documents. Then she called me into her office. "This is explosive," she said, "but it's also dangerous." "Go on." "If what this folder says is true, we're looking at a criminal network that may still be operating. These are powerful people. Some are still active in law, politics, media. And if we go public, we need protection." I agreed. We scanned every document, created backups, stored them with 3 separate attorneys, one in another country. I kept a hard drive in a lockbox, another in my safe. Zoe noticed the tension. "You're not sleeping," she said, "and you've stopped drawing." I told her a version of the truth. Family secrets, legal threats, an unfolding investigation. She nodded and hugged me. "We've got your back." Clara died 2 weeks later. No funeral, no obituary, just a short death notice in the city archive. And with her, the last living thread to the people who stole my first breath. But that didn't mean the story was over. A month later, a journalist from a major outlet contacted Iris. He'd heard whispers about a whistleblower's daughter, a black market adoption scandal, a folder. "Do you want to go public?" Iris asked. I hesitated. My company was growing. My home was finally peaceful. The fire of vengeance had cooled into a slow, simmering ache. But some truths don't go away just because you look away from them. "Yes," I said, "but on my terms." We agreed to an exclusive. 1 article, 1 interview. Controlled, safe. The story broke in late September. The headline read, 19 asterisk. Stolen at birth, one woman's journey to expose a secret adoption ring, and the father who tried to bury it. Asterisk. It went viral. Within a week, other survivors came forward, other mothers, former nurses, a retired judge. It spiraled fast. Investigations reopened. Hearings were held. Arrests were made. I received hate mail. I received thank you letters. Strangers sent me photos of children they thought might be me. Reporters camped outside my house. Clients pulled out. Others poured in. A book agent reached out. A documentary filmmaker. A podcast deal. But I stayed grounded. Because while the world wanted a scandal, I had lived a life. I had lost a father. I had rebuilt a house. I had stared down the ghosts in my attic and lived to tell the tale. And now, I was telling it. Eloise flew in from Cornwall for my 32nd birthday. We sat on the porch, sipping mint tea, watching Rue chase butterflies. "You did the right thing," she said. I looked at the house, the door with the new locks, the garage-turned studio, the maple trees swaying gently in the breeze. "I did what I had to," I said. She smiled. "I'm proud of you." And for once, I believed it. But deep inside, I still had one question. Where was Marissa Halden? Pass. End of Part 7. Let me know when to begin Part 8. The search for Marissa Halden began quietly. No headlines, no lawyers, no press. Just me, a laptop, and a name that might have never belonged to a real person, if not for the photo, the folder, and the mark she left on every document Clara had guarded with her life. She was the last piece. I tried official records first. Nothing current. The last sighting was a witness signature on a rental agreement from 2003 in Pittsburgh, under the name M. Halden. The trail went cold after that. No utility bills. No Social Security usage. No credit history. It was like she'd folded herself into the cracks of the world and vanished. I hired the same investigator who had found Eloise. This time, he worked faster. The scandal that followed my public story had cracked open sealed files like bones beneath a sledgehammer. People were willing to talk. He found a lead. A retired postal clerk from Ohio remembered forwarding letters from a Marissa Halden to a P.O. box in Kentucky for over a decade. A quiet arrangement, cash in hand, nothing digital. It was a start. The P.O. box belonged to a man named Arthur Lang, deceased 3 years ago. His will listed no children, but his property? A remote cottage in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I didn't hesitate. I drove there myself, alone. It was 6 hours through winding roads, past forgotten towns and dense forest. I left Rue with Iris. I didn't want distractions. Or witnesses. The cottage was exactly what I imagined someone like Marissa Halden would choose. Unassuming, surrounded by wild trees and stone paths overgrown with moss. No mailbox. No visible security. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Then, just as I turned to leave, the door creaked open. A woman stood in the doorway, hair long and gray, pulled into a braid, thin but upright. Her face was older, yes, But the bones, the eyes, the tilt of her chin? Unmistakable. She studied me for a long time before speaking. "Lena." My breath caught. "You know who I am?" She nodded once. "You're the only thing I never forgot." She opened the door wider. "Come inside." The cottage was small, tidy, filled with books and old photos. None of me. She gestured toward a wooden chair and sat across from me on a cushioned bench. "I thought you were dead," I said. "I had to be, for your sake." I opened my bag and placed the folder on the table. "I know everything, or most of it, but I want to hear it from you." She sighed. Her hands trembled as she reached for the teapot. "I was a nurse, neonatal. I loved my work. But I started noticing discrepancies. Babies going missing, charts being altered." I blew the whistle. Or tried to. They blacklisted me, threatened me. "When did you find out you were pregnant?" "Too late. I had no insurance by then, no money. I gave birth at a private clinic out of state. I didn't even register you, I just held you for 2 days. Then I called Clara. She was the only person I trusted." Tears brimmed in her eyes. "I wanted to keep you, God, I wanted to, but they were watching me. I knew they'd take you, sell you, or worse. So I asked her to leave you somewhere safe." "The fire station." She nodded. "When your story hit the news, I nearly fainted. I hadn't heard your name in decades. But there you were, grown, powerful, angry, and alive." I studied her. "Why didn't you come forward then?" "Because they're still out there. The people who made this possible, who let it happen, who buried it. And I thought, maybe I had no right anymore." "You do." "I saw your interview. You didn't need me. You needed answers. And maybe I didn't think I deserved to give them." Silence filled the cottage. "I want to know everything," I said. "Not just what happened. Who, when, names, places, documents. You're the only one who can fill in the gaps." She disappeared into a back room. When she returned, she was holding a small locked case. "This was my insurance," she said, "in case I ever needed to prove who you were. Or who they were." Inside were documents even Iris hadn't found. Internal memos, names of board members, secret payment ledgers, signed affidavits, a photo of me as a newborn, in her arms. "Do you want the world to know?" she asked, "or just the truth for yourself?" I hesitated. "I don't know yet." We spent 3 days together. 3 days that felt like decades compressed into hours. She told me about her childhood, her mistakes, her fears. About my birth, the songs she hummed in the clinic, the way I gripped her finger. How she carried that memory like a talisman through every lonely year. And I told her about my life. The garage. The locks. The house that never felt like mine until it was. On the 4th morning, I told her I wanted her to come home with me. She hesitated. "I'm not sure I belong there." "You do," I said. "Maybe more than anyone ever did." She packed 2 bags, left behind the past, and together we drove back through the mountains. When I brought her into the house, Eloise was waiting. The 2 women stood across from each other for a long time. "I failed her," Marissa said. "No," Eloise said softly. "You gave her to me, and I didn't break her." They embraced. Zoe came by that night, so did Anton and Jordan. They didn't ask questions when I introduced Marissa as someone very important. They just welcomed her. And for the first time, our house was full. Not haunted. Alive. In the weeks that followed, Marissa and I worked with Iris to digitize her archive. We passed files to journalists, cautiously, strategically. Whistleblowers began contacting us, former doctors, nurses. One man from the Department of Health. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. One morning, a letter arrived at our door. No return address, a single sentence on the paper. Shams asterisk, "We know what you're doing." Asterisk. I showed it to Iris. She didn't flinch. "They're bluffing," she said, "but it's time we go one step further." "What do you mean?" "Testify. Before Congress. The public hearings are starting. You and Marissa would be the key witnesses." I looked at Marissa. She nodded. We'll do it. 2 months later, we sat under the harsh lights of a government chamber, flanked by cameras and press. The room smelled of suits and microphones and legal adrenaline. I spoke first, told my story from the beginning. The garage, the locks, the discovery. Marissa followed, her voice trembling but resolute. When we finished, the room was silent. Then the questions began. The hearings lasted 5 days. By the end, the committee had committed to launching a full-scale investigation into black market adoption practices across state lines. More arrests followed. More children were identified. More stories came to light. And through it all, Marissa stayed with me. Some nights we sat on the porch and watched Rue chase fireflies. Other nights we stayed up late, printing documents, preparing for interviews. I redesigned the studio again, opened a new wing dedicated to advocacy campaigns. My company shifted from branding to storytelling. We helped survivors share their truth. We built platforms, podcasts, documentaries, impact reports. The house remained ours. Not a prison, not a grave, but a legacy. Still, one night, I sat alone in the attic, flipping through the original journal my father left behind. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't forgive him either. But I saw him now, not just as a tyrant, but as a man unraveling under the weight of lies. A man who was never built to hold the truth. I was. I closed the journal, placed it in a locked box, and labeled it Price-Size Asterix, Evidence of Survival. March-wise. Because that's what this house was now. Not just a home, a monument to what we uncovered, to who I had become, and to every truth that refused to stay buried. Sodapov. I never imagined that the attic, the same one where I once crouched in silence, dust choking my throat, would one day house a library of justice. We built shelves up there, Marissa and I, not just for journals or old receipts, but for printouts of every survivor's testimony we received. Every child reconnected with a birth parent, every official document unsealed, every apology letter from a system that had taken too long to say sorry. The attic was full now, of truth, of weight, of names finally spoken aloud. The hearings had ended, but the ripple effect hadn't. In the months that followed, the DOJ launched a federal task force. A national database was created to trace undocumented adoptions. Universities opened fellowships for survivors of black market placements. Our team designed the branding for it. That meant something to me, turning pain into visibility, turning silence into structure. But the spotlight had its price. My phone rang constantly, emails flooded in, requests for interviews, speaking engagements, book deals. People who had called me dramatic were now calling me a hero. Clients we'd lost returned, others we turned away. Through it all, my house became a revolving door of support groups, legal advisors, and documentarians. It stopped feeling like a home. Until Zoe intervened. "You need boundaries," she said, arms crossed in the studio doorway. "You can't save the world if you burn out in the process." She was right. So I took a break. I unplugged. I spent 2 weeks doing nothing but cooking with Marissa, hiking with Rue, and lying in the grass watching clouds roll over the house that had once felt like a tomb. That pause taught me something. Healing is an action, not a reward. Still, one thing haunted me. Not my father, not Clara, but the box. The last sealed box in the attic, labeled only CD. Clara's initials. I'd never opened it. Not out of fear, but out of respect. It felt like hers. A piece of her she hadn't meant to give me. But one night, after a long day of interviews and strategy calls, I climbed the ladder and sat on the floor beside it. I opened the lid. Inside were letters. Dozens, addressed to me. Some dated back 20 years. All of them unsent. The earliest ones were childlike, almost motherly. ****. Dear Lena, you smiled today. I watched from across the street when your mother took you to the park. You've grown so much. ***. Others were raw. Times asterisk. I don't know if you'd even want to know me. Maybe you'll hate me. Maybe you should. Matter wask. The last was dated 6 weeks before she died. Times asterisk. I hope someday you find these. I never had the courage to speak them aloud, but they're yours. Every word, because even from the shadows, I never stopped watching over you. I cried. For her. For me. For all the stolen things we could never get back. That week, I launched a memorial scholarship in her name for whistleblowers in the public health sector. The announcement went viral, and just like that, Clara, ghost, guardian, saboteur, was rewritten into history. The house stayed quiet through winter. Marissa baked obsessively. I took up running. Rue gained 5 pounds from sneaking scraps. Zoe began training a new design lead to give me space. Anton proposed to his boyfriend. Jordan took a sabbatical to paint in Greece. Life moved. And then spring came. With it, another letter. But this one wasn't threatening. It was an invitation. From the Department of Health and Human Services. To consult. To help build ethical reform policy. To ensure what happened to me to hundreds of others could never happen again. I said yes. I spent the next few months traveling between DC and home. Meetings. Roundtables. I sat across from people who had once enabled silence, and now begged for frameworks that prevented it. I watched laws change, sentence by sentence. I watched systems shift, inch by inch. One day, Marissa came with me. She sat in the gallery as I gave testimony before a bipartisan panel. Her eyes never left mine. Afterward, she whispered, "You're not just my daughter, you're the echo of every child they tried to forget." We held each other for a long time. The press called me the girl from the garage. It stuck. I didn't mind. Because that garage was where it began, where the cold taught me what fire felt like, where I learned that you can survive the unthinkable and still come out choosing to rebuild. And still, there was one final door I hadn't opened. Not a metaphor. A real one. The storm cellar beneath the backyard. It had been locked for years. My father never used it. As a child, I wasn't allowed near it. And after I bought the house, I never thought to check. But one afternoon, while digging a garden bed with Marissa, Rue started barking. His paws scratched frantically at the edge of the lawn. And there it was. The trapdoor. Rusted hinges, padlocked. We broke it open. Inside was a small room, concrete, damp, smelled like thyme and rot. A cot, a lantern, and boxes, all marked with hospital names. Patient files. Not just mine. Dozens. Hundreds. Records that proved what Clara had tried to track for years. The names of every infant rerouted through the black market system. Not all complete. Not all legible. But enough to verify. Enough to expose what was still hidden. We called Iris. By nightfall, the boxes were in evidence storage. By morning, we were back on national news. This time, not as victims, as witnesses, as architects of truth. I built a digital archive with Zoe, launched a nonprofit, created a helpline. By summer, over 3,000 people had accessed their birth records for the first time. Some met their parents. Some learned the names of siblings they never knew they had. Some just cried. But all of them had a place to start. And that's what I had fought for. A start. Not just for me. For everyone who ever slept in a garage wondering why love was conditional. For everyone who waited by a door that never opened. And for everyone who refused to let silence have the last word. By the time autumn arrived, the house on Hayworth Lane had changed forever. Not physically, though the new garden beds bloomed with purple sage and late-season poppies, but, in essence, it had once been a cage, then a battlefield. Now it was a kind of lighthouse. People came, not just friends or coworkers, but survivors. Some came to talk. Others came just to see the place where it all began, The garage house, they called it in online circles. A few sat under the maple tree in the backyard and cried without ever going inside. I welcomed them all, because I knew what it meant to find proof that pain had been real, that the door that slammed in your face wasn't a figment of your imagination, but part of a bigger machine designed to erase you. The digital archive we'd created was exploding. By October, nearly 6,000 people had submitted claims. Over 800 confirmed black market adoptions were now under federal review. The task force expanded. The nonprofit we founded was now housed in a downtown co-op building, with Zoe leading a full-time staff. I remained on the board, but I returned to the studio. I needed to. I needed to remember who I was before all of this, before the hearings, the headlines, the reconstruction of my identity. And strangely, I found myself designing again, logos, book covers, a series of minimalist prints based on the concept of memory. One morning, I designed something on instinct, a single-line drawing of a key. Above it, the words, "Entry isn't proof of belonging." I printed it, framed it, hung it in the garage. Then I launched a new brand, Printry is Eintry Garage and Ember, a creative studio dedicated to survivors, to women reclaiming their stories, to artists rebuilding after grief. It was a rebirth of my career, my vision, my soul. Marissa cried when I unveiled the logo. "It's perfect," she whispered. The first person we hired under the new brand was a young woman named Tasha. She was 22, fresh out of a halfway house, and had found her birth record through our archive. Her story mirrored mine: abandonment, betrayal, fire, and ash. But she had spark, and I recognized it. The second person we hired? A graphic novelist who had built an entire series about a girl who survived by hiding inside walls. Her name was Leah. She spoke rarely, but when she handed me a sample page, it felt like looking in a mirror. We grew. And for the first time in my life, I stopped expecting the floor to fall out. Then one afternoon, while packing up from a design conference in Chicago, I got the call. It was Iris. "Lena," she said, "you're going to want to sit down." "Why?" "Because a woman named Marissa Halden just walked into the embassy in Oslo. And she claims she's your biological mother." Silence. "Iris," I said slowly, "Marissa is home, with me, in my house." "Exactly, which means the woman in Oslo is lying, or she's someone else entirely." My heart didn't race. It stopped. I returned to my hotel, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. I called Marissa. Her voice was calm, confused. "What do you mean someone is using my name?" She swore she had no idea, swore she'd never left the country, swore she didn't have a passport. But the embassy had confirmed fingerprints and blood work, which meant only one thing. The woman in my home wasn't who she claimed to be. I flew back that night. When I entered the house, she was sitting at the kitchen table. A cup of tea steamed in front of her. Rue lay by her feet. She looked up at me. "You found out." I didn't answer. She folded her hands. "I'm not Marissa, not by birth." "Then who are you?" "I was her sister." My knees buckled. I sat slowly. "Her name was Marissa. Mine is Mira. I took her place because she was dying, cancer. She asked me to go to you, to tell her story, to protect the truth she couldn't live long enough to say herself." "So you lied." "I became saw her," Mira said. "I knew everything. I memorized her life. I carried her journal, her documents, her fears. I lived as her, because the world needed her alive to finish what she started." I stood. "You let me believe you were my mother." Her eyes welled. "No, I let you believe someone who loved you came back for you, because she did, through me. Everything I gave you was true." I walked out. I drove until the sky bled into dawn. I screamed. I hit the steering wheel. I pulled over near the cliffs just north of the city and sobbed until my lungs turned inside out. The next morning I returned. She was still there. She hadn't packed, hadn't run. Iris met us both that afternoon, and together we unpacked everything. It was true. Mira had assumed Marissa's identity with her blessing. There were emails, videos, even a will. Marissa had died in hospice 5 months earlier, alone, but determined. Her last request was that Mira deliver her truth, no matter the deception it required. And Mira had. Every story, every file, every tear. It was real. And so was her love for me. Eventually, I forgave her. Because she hadn't stolen Marissa's legacy. She had preserved it. Months passed. The Oslo embassy processed the DNA match and verified the mistake. Mira was given protected status in the US, citing her role in exposing the trafficking ring. It was controversial. The media spun it both ways. Heroism, fraud, martyrdom. I stayed silent. Because some truths don't need defending, only surviving. The nonprofit grew. So did the studio. We opened branches in 3 cities. Garage and Ember became a movement, a symbol. And in a quiet moment, on a quiet morning, I walked into the garage, now bathed in sunlight, and wrote the final line of my memoir. My father told me to sleep in the garage. So I built a home from the ashes. Then I closed the laptop and opened the door to the rest of my life. End of part 10. Let me know when to begin part 11. Part of me thought the story ended when I closed the laptop. It didn't. The memoir was only the beginning. We released it in early spring. The first printing sold out in 24 hours. By the end of the week, I was invited to speak on every major talk show. They called it a master class in resilience, a narrative rebirth, the definitive survivor story of our time. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was the quiet that followed. The silence after exposure. The stillness of a life no longer bracing for impact. At first, I welcomed it. I needed it. The house finally belonged to no one but me. The garden bloomed without being trampled by reporters. Rue slept through the night without barking at unfamiliar cars. But the stillness began to itch. I wasn't restless. I was waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. Then, one evening, a message came through the archive's private inbox. Naib's subject, 2003, missing file fragment. Attached was a single image. Grainy, a child's birth certificate, partially redacted. The name matched a file from the seller. But the timestamp didn't. It had been digitally altered, falsified. And not just this one. Over the next week, we discovered 23 more like it, all tied to one hospital system. One that had never been implicated in the original investigation. Iris convened an emergency meeting. They're still doing it, she said. Not under the same name, not as brazenly, but it's still happening. We missed a layer. Mira was silent, then she stood. We go back in. We divided our teams, assigned each to a cluster of states, cross-referenced clinic closures with unusual birth record spikes. We pulled public financials, scanned staff names, tracked employee transfers. It was there, buried beneath shell companies and new branding. The system had adapted, learned, gotten smarter. But it wasn't perfect. Because it had never anticipated survivors uniting, or whistleblowers doubling down, or a woman who'd once been forced to sleep in a garage turning her trauma into a global operation. We gathered evidence. Testimonies. Metadata. Zoe built a secure channel for anonymous tips. Jordan returned from Greece and turned the entire discovery into a visual timeline, an interactive installation we debuted at the Justice and Memory Summit in DC. Anton and Leah began developing an AI tool to flag suspicious birth record alterations in real time. We didn't sleep much, but we didn't stop. Then one night, while combing through archived newspaper data, I found it. A photo of my father. Not young, not in a refinery uniform, but in a suit. Standing beside a man named Lawrence Denning, CEO of Midvale Healthcare Group, the same group responsible for the new falsified records. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. He had always said he worked in logistics, that the refinery job was just a way to provide. But this photo placed him in a corporate boardroom, a conference panel, 1999. He had been in on it. From the beginning. I took it to Iris. She paled. He wasn't just a cog, he was a gatekeeper. Suddenly, so much made sense. Why he feared Marissa. Why he shut Clara down. Why he threatened Eloise. He hadn't just participated. He had helped run it. The weight of that broke something open in me. Not grief, not shock, just finality. My father hadn't been a broken man who made bad choices. He had been complicit, strategic, dangerous. I took the photo down to the maple tree, burned a copy, watched the ash scatter across the roots. "This is where it ends," I whispered. And it did. Because 3 weeks later, Denning was indicted. And with him, 4 more executives. We released the second wave of reports. The archive crashed from traffic. We had to migrate to a bigger server. The story led every evening news segment for a month. And then, something unexpected happened. People started sending commentaires de gratitude. Not in the form of letters or donations, but stories. Photos of families reunited. Videos of birth mothers embracing children they hadn't seen in 30 years. Artwork, music, poetry. A girl in Nebraska wrote a song called "The Girl in the Garage." It went viral. She sent me the lyrics. She**. She slept with ghosts behind locked doors. She draws them open floors. She found her name in shattered glass and stitched it into something vast. Asterisk. I cried. Then Mira stood in my doorway and handed me a letter. "This arrived today," she said, "from Eloise." I hadn't heard from her in over a year. She'd gone back to Cornwall after the hearings. Needed distance. I hadn't blamed her. Inside the envelope was a single sentence. Times, asterisk. Thank you for becoming more than either of us could have dreamed. Asterisk. I flew to Cornwall the next week. She met me at the station. We didn't say much, just walked along the cliffs, ate lunch at a cafe, sat on a bench overlooking the sea. "I was afraid," she said, "that I'd been erased, that what I gave you wasn't enough." "You gave me a compass," I replied, "and I walked with it until I could draw my own maps." She smiled. When I left, she pressed a pendant into my hand. It was the locket, the one she'd worn when I was a child. Inside, 2 photos. Her. And me. I returned home and hung it by the attic door. A reminder. Not of what was lost, but of what we rebuilt. That winter, Garage and Ember opened its 5th location, in Berlin. The studio hosted an exhibition titled Inheritance. We printed the names of every known stolen child on transparent banners and hung them in layers. Visitors walked through, touching each name, whispering their stories. We didn't sell tickets. We asked only for silence. And tears. And they came. By the end of the year, Garage and Ember had become more than a brand. It was a movement. A language. A key in every survivor's pocket. And I was no longer the girl in the garage. I was the one who lit the match. And watched the darkness recoil. On the 1-year anniversary of the memoir's release, I stood beneath the maple tree with a spade in one hand and a time capsule in the other. Rue sniffed at the dirt as I dug. Mira stood nearby, arms folded, her expression unreadable. Around us, the backyard was silent, except for the rustling leaves and the creak of the swing I'd installed weeks earlier. We buried the capsule at the roots. Inside, a copy of the memoir, the first Garage and Ember print, the key that once opened the attic wardrobe, and the photo of me as a baby, creases and all, proof of every version of the truth we'd uncovered. "I'm not burying this to forget," I said. "I'm burying it to remind." Mira nodded. "Of who you were? Of who I refused to become." The ceremony wasn't for show. There were no cameras, no applause. It was just us, quiet and grounded. I needed that, before what came next. Because the story wasn't just mine anymore, it was the world's. Garage and Ember launched a global digital fellowship that spring, Storyroot, a training ground for creatives reclaiming generational narratives. Survivors from over 40 countries applied. Some had fled war zones, others were navigating post-trauma displacement, some didn't even know their own birthdays. We taught design, branding, writing. We taught silence how to scream in color. And in every session, I started with a single sentence. Trauma will not define your voice, but it will shape your clarity. They listened. And then they built. We held our first international summit in Lisbon. Nearly 800 attended. Artists, activists, journalists, historians. Together we created a tapestry of reclaimed stories so loud no algorithm could silence it. I didn't speak at the opening ceremony. Mira did. She told the story of her sister, of Marissa Holden's dying wish, of the choice to become her legacy rather than let it fade. She ended with a quote I hadn't heard before. There are no second chances, only hidden first ones, buried under fear. The crowd rose to their feet. By summer, Garage and Ember's Berlin team had secured a grant to digitize suppressed birth records from the 1980s. In the U.S., we partnered with congressional leaders to draft the Truth and Identity Act, a bill that would make it a federal offense to knowingly falsify infant documentation. It passed. Unanimously. I testified again, this time with Mira beside me. Outside the chamber, a young woman approached. I was born at Midvale, she said. I never thought I'd know who I was, but now I do. She hugged me. And I understood then. Some lives begin twice. But not all stories had tied up neatly. There was still the question of my biological father, the name Marissa had refused to reveal. One day, Mira handed me an envelope. I wasn't going to give you this, but I think you're ready. Inside was a photo. A man in a military uniform, mid-30s, sharp eyes, smile like a blade. On the back, *B, your father, he never knew, *. There was no surname, no location, just the initial. I didn't pursue it. I'd spent a lifetime trying to piece together every broken shard of origin, but some stories only create scars when reopened. Instead, I wrote my own. Garage and Ember published an anthology that fall, Voices from the Garage, 42 contributors, 17 languages. Every story was a map back to self. We debuted it at the rebuilt Hayworth House, now open to the public once a month as the Garage Museum of Memory. We preserved the original studio, the garden, even the garage bed frame, now framed in glass, a haunting monument to both trauma and transformation. The night of the launch, I stood on the porch in a tailored black blazer, my speech folded in my hand. But I didn't read it. Instead, I said this. I used to think survival was the end of the road. Now I know it's the beginning of every revolution. Applause didn't follow. Stillness did. And that was more powerful. Because in that stillness lived recognition, acknowledgement, and finally peace. I closed the museum for the season. I took a sabbatical. 3 months in Kyoto, 2 in New Zealand, a cabin in Vermont. I hiked, I painted. I learned to cook from scratch. I forgot passwords and remembered how to be alone. When I returned, Mira had dyed her hair. Silver suits you, I said. She smiled. You should see yours. Rue was older now, slower, but still chased butterflies on warm mornings. Zoe had taken over operations full-time. Jordan had curated an entire gallery in New York. Anton and Leah had adopted twins. And me? I bought the building next to the original house, renovated it into a retreat center. For silence. For stillness. For second beginnings. On the last day of the year, I walked through every room of my home. I touched each wall, sat on each step, whispered goodbye to the ghosts still lingering in the corners. Then I stepped into the garage. The same one where my story began. I stood in the doorway and whispered, "You didn't win." Then I turned off the light, closed the door, and walked into the new year. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.